Joining us this week, Jason Falinski is the federal Liberal member for Mackellar on Sydney's northern beaches, I guess. Jane Caro is a social commentator and communications consultant, and Tim Williams is head of cities for the engineering firm Arup. Welcome. Thank you for coming in.
Nice to be here.
Israel Folau's GoFundMe page has been closed down by the fundraising website, with the $700,000 raised so far to be refunded to those who have already donated to his legal campaign against Rugby Australia. Now, the website says Folau's campaign breaches its values, but is it appropriate for a fundraising site to take sides on a divisive issue like this? Jane Caro.
Well, it's difficult, isn't it? I think the problem is that when I read their terms of agreement, it does include discriminating against people of different sexual orientation. And I can understand why a site like this would have such rules, because otherwise you could get white supremacists, you could get hate groups, you have to be really careful. And I think this was pointed out to them, that this breached their terms of the way they do things, and they made a decision about what they want their brand to stand for, and I think everyone has the right to do that. I mean, it's a really difficult argument, this one, because whilst I am very much supportive of freedom of speech and freedom of religion, I'm also supportive of freedom from religion, which I think we don't talk about enough. And I do have trouble getting my head around the idea that it is discriminatory to prevent people discriminating against others. And I think that's the bit that sticks in a lot of people's craw with this particular debate around publicly, while employed under circumstances where you'd already been asked not to do it, saying that this particular group should go to hell. Now, I'm an atheist. He said we're going to hell anyway. That doesn't bother me in the least. Atheism is a choice.
You're going to hell on about 5 grounds, according to Israel.
Yeah. I'm in there with my ears pinned back.
There's a glass of wine after dinner.
Yeah.
Well, that's gone.
Get down to the
look, some people say,
below.
even if you disagree with what Israel Folau's done, and even if you accept Rugby Australia's right to show him the door because of all the reasons you said, you still like the idea that in Australia you can go to a court and ask them to adjudicate on the matter, and in that context, shouldn't he have the right to reach out for a bit of help with that? Yeah,
look, if he was to take it to court, absolutely, that's his right as a citizen, and it can be judged accordingly. But if I was on the GoFundMe site and I looked at what my terms of trade were, I'd be in a very difficult position in terms of making that decision, particularly under pressure. Presumably there may be other funding sites, many of which exist, that don't have those terms, and perhaps he could look there.
He may already be doing so. Jason Falinski, do you think websites should pick and choose like this? They say they're standing up for their own values. Have they got a right to do that, or are they being sort of doorkeepers of morality?
Well, they certainly are being doorkeepers of morality, but it's their right to do so. And as Jane points out, there are plenty of other sites that Israel Folau can go to get funding for his legal action. And, he doesn't have to do it online. He can just pick up the phone or send emails out and get people to donate money. They're entitled to. It's their platform, how they want to use it and what sort of brand they want to create.
Okay, but Ticket Tech doesn't say, look, we're offering tickets to all these play. I wouldn't go to that play. It's no good, and this band's a bit awful. But
they do. They do. They don't sell tickets to every event. There are a number of ticket providers in the marketplace. In my electorate, there's a great company called Humanitax that does it as a not-for-profit and then gives some of the money back to your chosen charity. So you don't have to use Ticket Tech to sell your tickets. You can use a whole bunch of providers. So, no, I don't. I think the analogy works if you want to use that one.
You say he might well go somewhere else and raise money that way. The other odd thing about this is he was trying to raise $3 million. That's what he said his target was, and yet all the legal advice is that you couldn't spend $3 million on this sort of legal action. It might cost a few $100,000. Yeah. So there was always a question of why was he trying to raise such a lot of money, and if he didn't spend it, where would it go? That's
a great question. You need to ask him that, but I have to say it's the first time I've ever seen a president of the Law Council saying, please don't give lawyers more money. And I have to say that fortunately I've never had to pay for it, but I've been both actively and tangentially involved in a number of legal cases, and they've always cost 10 times more than the lawyers
told you. But not $3 million.
Well, this one's going to cost a lot of money, I suspect.
Tim Williams.
I may be the only qualified barrister here, so I can think of a good home. I can think of a good home for $3 million.
Tim, we're not talking about your rates. We're talking about the rates of a normal person.
But you see, this story makes me very grumpy, and I feel they can all go to hell, right? I mean, let's start at the
did you
end.
mean
Welshmen were not on the list.
Let's start at the end, right? There is a bit of a trend for the tech-based platforms to become censorious and to assert their values when we thought they're neutral. There is a real issue developing about them expressing their cultural preferences, I think, right? Number one.
Mm-hmm.
I think number two, what was he asking for money for? Not to support his values, but to support a law case against somebody that might have sacked him unlawfully. Might have, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's an issue there about him looking for the funds to do that. And people who don't agree with him, probably quite sympathetic, some of them, with the fact that this was potentially rather arbitrary.
Okay, in other words, you don't have to agree with the views to accept that you shouldn't be sacked for them.
I don't think
that's another point of view.
And but I'm grumpy about all of it because I'm not somebody who has a biblical take on the universe, so I doubt that anybody's going to go to hell for sexual activity. So I think I'm a bit unhappy about that. But the second thing also. They had a right to do so, but, geez, they could have thought in a sort of slightly wider cultural framework of, diversity of views. Were they lent over their sponsors?
No one's talking about free speech. No one's talking about his right as an individual citizen. They're talking about in this professional context where he's part of the entertainment business, really, called sport. And the reason they can pay their players like him $4 million is that they've got lots of families and people coming to see the game, paying their money. They've got sponsors.
But the logic of that is that the tech platform that's deplatformed him need to understand that is the issue, that he was sacked for on contractual reasons, not for his values.
Okay, but they've got a financial interest. I mean, this is the free market at work, isn't it? If GoFundMe get 5,000 emails, as I assume they've got, from people saying, you're now associated in our minds, fairly or unfairly, with homophobia, then GoFundMe says, well, we don't want that. That's not worth this profit.
And it's how you change culture too. This is about changing the way you are allowed to speak about a group of people that not that long ago used to get locked up if they, were exposed publicly. So it is part of, and there will always be overreaches when you go from one extreme to another. But it is part of changing the culture and making people have to think twice before expressing particular prejudices.
I'm not a Christian either, right? But, it's
are you a fornicator? Are you a liar? Are you a drunkard?
Totally.
Are you Welsh?
I'm guilty to all of those things, right? But at the end of the day, it's like...
You don't seem very remorseful.
It's like saying to people who think that they've got a certain truth, that they're not allowed to express that truth, right?
It's not saying that.
This is a zero-sum game, is what people are saying. That you're not allowed to believe certain things and put them out on certain platforms. Are these people broadcasters in the end of the day, or are they neutral platforms? This is a really important issue about regulation, right?
And I think you're also saying that we don't want to live in a world, Jane, where commercial companies who are just going about their business trying to do something end up having to fight culture wars, where one person says they won't go to Woolworths if they sell this product, and then the other group says, well, if you ban that product, we won't go there either.
Well, you might not want it to be like that, but unfortunately that's where we're at. And in a way, consumers have every right to make those kinds of decisions based on whether we happen to agree with the basis of their decision or not. I mean, for goodness sake, wasn't there a whole fight in the States about the fact that suppliers, and it's still argued here, should be able to say, I won't bake a birthday cake for a gay couple that are going to get married. Well, if it's good enough at that end, it's good enough at the other end. I always thought when they started that argument that they were causing themselves a lot of grief, because they actually have a more minority view than the majority, and by opening that door and saying we should have the right to say we won't bake a cake for you or clean your house or play music at your wedding.
There's a constitutional right to say what they did in the US. That's different over here. This is an important point about the platform itself, by the way. In the States, they couldn't have banned Israel Folau from that.
They must be able to ban something. I mean, if you tried to raise money for a neo-Nazi group on GoFundMe, I'm sure then the Americans could say no. I mean, Facebook says that. Facebook bans free speech that they regard as hate-filled.
But a lot of this stuff is still to be tested in the courts as to whether there is a constitutional right. I'm just saying, in America, it's a different context.
But before we move on, Jason, can I get your view on what Tim is saying about the fact that this guy's free speech should be the primary thing in this?
Oh, look, I think that's absolutely true, that, Israel Folau should be allowed to say what he wants to say. But equally, Rugby Australia has, as you pointed out, a duty to its supporters and its own game to ensure that they are continuing to operate. And what happened was he was asked in his contract to refrain from making such remarks. He did it once. He was asked to stop doing it. He did it again, as I understand it. And they said, well, we're just going to have to terminate your contract for cause. That, by the way, are exact clauses that exist in the United States, in the NFL, in the basketball, all those sorts of places. In terms of people, these tech channels not allowing certain comments to be made on their platform or not, I think the more insidious thing is not that GoFundMe took this off, because we all know that they did it. We all know why they did it. There are other platforms for Israel Folau to use. It's places like Facebook that are randomly using algorithms to filter what sort of information we all get, and we don't know it.
That's true.
We don't know they're doing that. And that's a far bigger issue for me, because that can actually, back in 2012, they changed their algorithm to put in people's news feeds the importance of voting. And they tried that in California, but not in other places. And it had a material impact on the number of people who went and voted in that election. Now, I'm not saying that's bad per se, but it is bad that they only did it in one place that encouraged more people to vote, and it had a material effect on the election.
Which happened to be a Democrat area, I guess.
It wasn't going to change the result in California.
Right?
It wasn't. Well, no, it wasn't going to change the results in California, because that was always going to vote.
Okay, but
for
they're
Barack
using
Obama.
their power selectively, you say.
And they admitted to that.
And that's
how
a
many
bigger
times
issue.
have they done it without us knowing that they've done it? Now, they may never have done it again. We don't know. They may have done it several times, and once again, we don't know. And that's a bigger issue for me.
Deplatformed. What was your word, Tim?
I don't believe any of my words are now
It was a
legitimate.
good one. Now, Monday Political Forum, Jason Falinski is here, Jane Caro and Tim Williams. The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, has welcomed the rescue operation that will see the children of the notorious ISIS fighter Khalid Sharif return to Australia. Here's the PM, confident that the children will be rehabilitated.
They've got off to a horrible start in life as a result of the appalling decisions of their parents. And they'll find their home in Australia, and I'm sure they'll be embraced by Australians. And as a result of that embrace, I'm sure they will live positive and happy lives.
Are you as confident as Mr Morrison about their prospects, given what they've been through, the horrors that they've been through? And what about the adults who chose to fight for Islamic State? Should they too be brought home like the children? Jason?
Look, the answer to that question is yes. We live in a liberal democracy. I think the contract that we have with the community is that every person should have the opportunity to live their life to their full potential. What has happened here is just awful, but we should not visit the sins of the parents on the children. And so bringing them back and giving them every opportunity to succeed and thrive in life is the right thing to do. They are Australian citizens. There is one thing that I did want to point out, which is that this didn't just happen. The number of people in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, in our military and service, that went in to allow this to actually occur is quite extraordinary. And I think it speaks to the care and compassion of our community and our society that we dedicate that many resources to help half a dozen children. And that's a right thing to do.
Okay, but the Prime Minister had a formulation during the election campaign, because he obviously didn't want to get into a huge lot of questions about this. And he said, I will not have Australian lives put at risk to get these children back. Isn't that essentially what's happened in the end?
I don't know, to be honest. The operation that allowed this to occur, obviously no one that I am aware of lost their lives, but I think it is fantastic that we as a society and a community said, look, this is important.
We had people going into this quite difficult territory to negotiate with the Kurds. What about that more... I think nearly everyone will agree with you about, and agree with the Prime Minister about bringing the children back. They, as he said, they didn't choose to go there. What about the more difficult thing, the young men who actually signed up for this? Should they be brought back? Some people say that they're less dangerous here than they are roaming the world.
I don't think there's any evidence to support that. But look, we have international agreements, which means we can't make people stateless. The government has made it very clear that if there are dual citizens in that position, we will cancel their Australian citizenship. We did a lot of work to stop people going to Syria in the first place. We weren't always successful, as it would be difficult to always be successful. But look, anyone that's in that situation was obviously radicalised before they left, and coming back here would pose a clear and present danger to our community and the safety of people in that community. So we need to, as a government, because that's the first order of any government, to ensure that our community is safe.
I mean, even the Americans say that we and everyone else and they should bring these people back, because otherwise they'll just go around the world creating mayhem.
Yeah, well, they'll have nowhere to be. So when they get caught, whether it be in Turkey, Syria or elsewhere, they will be sought to be returned to Australia as Australian citizens. So we will be in the situation where they will need to come back here and we will need to deal with that situation.
Except for the dual citizens whose
citizenship we will cancel.
Okay, Tim Williams.
I was just wondering whether this was more or less difficult than the Israel-Folau question, and whether I could be any more or less quirky than before.
We don't pitch up the easy ones, you know.
Geez. But I think something like this, slightly legalistic. I take the point, that we have legal obligations. We can't make people stateless. What is really even greyer is, have they committed crimes for which they should be imprisoned if they come back to Australia? Have they committed crimes? I'm very unclear. I think they might have. We might even have people on our hands who've killed Australian citizens in this thing.
But can you prove it? Because, of course, the crimes have occurred in an enemy territory where we can't do any evidentiary collection.
It's true. I might be wrong on that, but I'm happy to be told I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure we've passed laws that made it unlawful to go
there. In which case, that is true. In which case, there's a presumption that they committed a crime for which they can be imprisoned when they return. But at that point, we can't keep them. They can go back into society. So I think there are some quite straightforward legal issues around this, not over-complex. The more complex one is, will they be able to fit back into Australian society, or they become so radicalised? And I don't think anybody's got an answer to that question.
Well, probably some can be rehabilitated, some can't. Jane Carrott?
Yeah, well, I think that with the children, really, it's a no-brainer. And I want to give a shout-out to their indefatigable grandmother who worked so hard to keep that issue in the public eye. And also Four Corners, that did a wonderful, in-depth look at what she was doing and the children themselves and the circumstances in which they found themselves. That's extraordinary. But I also think you're right about the complications of bringing the adults who chose to go over there. My view is they're our responsibility. They're nobody else's responsibility. Whatever it was that caused them to become radicalised, they were exposed to in this country. And therefore, we need to take that responsibility on board and exercise the law in the way that it's written to punish them if that's needed to be punished. And if not, then we need to look at what we can do in terms of bringing them back and helping them to find a place in this society.
Okay, you wouldn't want them living next door, though, would you?
No, but there's lots of people I would want living next door, and some of them have actually lived next door. So sometimes that just happens.
Here's your chance.
Not where I live now. Present neighbours accepted. So I've never thought that was much of an argument. They're our responsibility. We need to look at what needs to be done to help these young men. I mean, the most tragic story of all, I think, well, it's maybe not the most, but one of the ones that got to me was that young boy who was radicalised from rural Victoria, who was 16 or 17, a real misfit. He went over there and the only thing he managed to do was blow himself up. I just felt that on every level that kid had been neglected, let go, fallen through the cracks, everything that could go wrong.
An incompetent terrorist, though.
Well, so am I. I'm really glad he was. But at the same time, it's a terrible, terrible
Okay, but I mean, the mathematics of the horrors of this. I mean, what about one of the girls, the girl who's being brought back? She's 18 years old. She's now got two children,
kids,
another on the way.
Two
she was married, in quote marks, when she was 13.
Well, she's going to need help on every level. And that's not about being an ISIS terrorist or anything like that. That's about being an exploited, abused woman.
Abused victim of ISIS.
Yeah,
absolutely. It is currently 8 minutes to 6, the Monday Political Forum. Jason Falinski is here. He's the Federal Liberal member for Mackellar. Jane Carroll, social commentator, activist, communications consultant. Tim Williams, head of cities for the engineering firm Arup. Let's check the traffic. After this, Boris Johnson and his marital affairs, and should they rule him out of office as the next British PM?
Traffic, ABC Radio Sydney.
At Willoughby, Penshurst Street at William Street, 2 cars involved in a crash there. At Glenbrook, a car crash, Great Western Highway near Knapsack Street, eastbound traffic affected. At Paddington, a motorcycle and car accident, Oxford Street at William Street, 1 eastbound lane is closed. And in Asquith, 2 cars involved in an accident, Pacific Highway at Amore Street, with 1 northbound lane closed. They've cleared the car breakdown in Beverly Hills, the M5 East motorway between King George's Road and Kingsgrove Road. But at Pymble, there's still water on the road, Pacific Highway approaching Bobbin Head Road, with one northbound lane out. Car and truck crash at Ingleburn. The Hume, just past Brooks Road, one southbound lane is out. And at Wentworthville, finally, Cumberland Highway approaching the M4, a semi-trailer breakdown with one southbound lane affected. Jason Falinski, Jane Carroll, Tim Williams in. Could you stop laughing when I'm doing the traffic? What were you laughing about? What was the joke?
Boris Johnson, because, you know...
That's all.
Tim's been drinking with him many nights.
You know him, do you?
I know, yeah. I went to New York with him once I was working for the London Mayor. He was the London Mayor, and he's a brilliant communicator. I saw him charm 2,000 people.
He's Trump with a thesaurus.
But he is indeed. But I can't even say that with my teeth at the moment. But he's got a kind of Hawkeyan flaw. You know, I've been watching the documentary recently about Bob Hawke. Yeah. There's a Hawkeyan element to this, but he hasn't had the moment where Hawke went on television to confess his flaws. I think that is part of the problem here. I do think it's becoming difficult to be a politician in the kind of digital era. I think Boris is in danger of being an analogue politician in a digital era where things are immediately reported and news out there. And I think he needs to understand that everybody's now watching him all the time for all these errors and flaws that are in him, and they just can't be ignored anymore.
Is he a properly... I mean, this is a serious... Is he a properly serious person?
Yes. I mean, he's very...
You know, Jeremy Hunt, who he's up against, might be a bit boring, but he's a properly serious person.
Yeah, but we need more than just properly serious people to get us out of this one. You know, i.e., Boris has got a genius to actually potentially bring both sides together weirdly. It sometimes takes somebody who's been on the one side who's willing to compromise with the other because they can bring maybe their side to the table, right? So I think Boris is kind of the last hope. But I think either he learns a lesson from this or he's over. Because in the modern era, whatever the details are, the real perception out there immediately that there's some problem with his character has damaged him. So I think...
OK, because the latest instalment of the character question, and there's been many instalments over the years, but is an argument he had with his girlfriend, which was taped by a neighbour. Well, you might have a view about that.
Yeah. I warned you about neighbours.
Released to the newspapers. It has his girlfriend sort of screaming it, saying, get out of my flat, get off me, these sort of things. You're an entitled idiot for spilling wine on my couch and not caring.
But, look, I don't know the ins and outs. So I do know that the person who taped it was a kind of activist who hated Boris. There's all that going on. At the same time, I know that Boris's sort of supporters have tweeted, couple have row. Yeah. So there is, right, so it hasn't gone, the police have not pursued it. I don't know where it goes, but there is a real issue, two things in modern politics, right? One about him, which is he has to sort his act out, otherwise it will be over. Two, I think, is who do we want to be our politicians? And can any of them stand the rigorous, immediate sort of, attention that they now get? I rather think even not just politics is impossible in this era, human relationships will become impossible in this era. We might all fail some of these tests. So I'm a bit worried about whether we're expecting too much. We'll see.
Jane Carroll.
I don't know why you're worried. It seems to me that in the modern era, for a male politician, particularly on the right of politics, it's become point of entry to treat women badly, be particularly awful to any wives or girlfriends. I think apparently you can grab them by the genitals, you can move on them like a bitch.
Okay, that's Trump, not Boris.
But he's no one cares about what he's done. I can't see why we'd have a double standard for Boris Johnson. It seems to me that doing that kind of thing to women these days by men in power, and I'm only half joking about this, is no longer considered as seriously as it once was.
Look, I get all that, but I don't know what the evidence is in this particular case of any law being breached whatsoever. So as far as I'm concerned...
Mostly it's not about breaches of law. But imagine, for an example, if Hillary Clinton had 5 children by 3 different husbands. Do you think she'd have even been within cooey of standing for the presidency? Our difference of standard in terms of what we expect from female politicians who want to lead and male politicians is quite extraordinary.
There was a piece in the Times yesterday saying this is the first time we'll have a British Prime Minister where we don't know how many children he's got. He won't say.
I doubt that's the first time.
Not the first time.
The idea that Hillary Clinton is above reproach
Nobody said
nonsense.
She was above reproach,
She's
Tim.
as crooked as the rest of them.
Don't do that overreach.
Jason Falinski, what do you reckon of Boris? Surely you've been out drinking with him like Tim.
No, I haven't had the pleasure of meeting Boris Johnson. Look,
that's all I'll say about the man.
I've got to say, taking it away from Boris or not Boris, is that I think we just had a federal election where there was an over-focus on polls, followed by an overfocus on people, and policies got neglected, much less values and ideas. So, look, I know what Jane's saying, but I really think when it comes to Boris that we should spend more time talking about what he's standing for and what he's going to do and how he's going to do it, rather than, you know, whether there was a row or not or what the polls are showing. And I think that's the important thing, because as Tim has been pointing out to us at great length, we think politics in Australia is interesting. In the United Kingdom at the moment, it's putting us to shame again. We'll have to lift our game down.
Well, it's an existential issue for them, isn't it? I mean, it's serious in the sense that some people say they might lose Ireland or Scotland out of it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I quite like this American sitcom called The Good Place, and in it, one of the angels goes to Earth and stays there when they're not meant to, and one of the judges says to him, "Crazy stuff's been happening. You know, the UK's decided to leave Europe," and I mean that's essentially happened. And it's just, I think it's going to take a very concerted effort by a lot of people to get this to work.
Will the war of Boris's couch make a difference, and the red wine stain, will that be the determining factor?
No.
Well, the thing about the stain is that according to the tape, according to the red wine stain, according to the tape, she says words to the effect of, "You're such an entitled, privileged person.
All true.
You think you can wreck somebody's really good couch and not really say sorry."
More damaging.
And that's really damaging.
That would be more damaging in the end.
If you're going to wreck the couch, say sorry.
No, absolutely.
Get the wallet out. Say I'll pay for the cleaning.
I've given up now. There is no defence to that.
That's right. Just because you've had a drink with
I know.
Tim. We're out of time, but thank you very much to Jason Falinski. He's the Federal Liberal member for Mackellar.